This is the Freedom Frontier. Imagine that you are the US government in the year 1994. In the last year, you have murdered 77 men, women, and children for being suspicious of their purchasing of firearms. And by murder, I do mean attempting to catch them by surprise so no one would get harmed, which involves shooting at their dogs and then shooting at them through the walls of their compound. Then, after 51 days of destroying their vehicles so they couldn't escape, cutting their electricity and water lines and blaring noises of tortured animal screams and flashing blinding lights into their compound so the people inside couldn't sleep for 51 days. Just to ultimately inject military-grade tear gas and incendiary flashbangs into their building, causing it to engulf in flames, killing all but 9. So yes, I do mean murdered. For what, though? Oh, again, for having suspicious purchases of AR-15s. Now, I know I'm retracting a bit, but think about this for just a second. What are the federal government's solutions to potential terrorism? Do you have a man in Idaho entrapped into selling 2 illegal firearms to an ATF informant? Solution: murder his dog, his wife, and his son, and wound him and his friend in the process. Do you have a group of highly religious people in Waco, Texas, purchasing weapons and claiming that the world is becoming tyrannical? Solution: shoot their dogs and then shoot at them. Provoke them to fire back, make up child abuse claims, then later admit they weren't true. Blare flashing lights and noises of people chanting and the screams of dying animals, which again is being played to very religious people, provoking them to further stay committed to a fight. But wait, it doesn't stop there. Then you light them all on fire, killing them. In all seriousness, these solutions are egregious acts of pure evil, further proving that the US government has no remorse for human life and will operate with no limitations to do as they please. This was apparent after the Ruby Ridge incident was followed by the Waco siege, and for those who don't know about Ruby Ridge, I'll link my report on it in the description. But in short, the government made a man sell illegal weapons to one of their undercover agents, and then ended up murdering his dog, his wife, and his son, plus wounding him and his friend. But let's go back to shortly after Waco. Naturally, the public's perception of the federal government began to darken, and mistrust swelled, resulting in the forming of 490 militias. And well, if you might have guessed, this did not sit well with the government. So if you're still imagining that you are the US government, again, you and your agencies have committed 2 horrific overreaches, and your public perception, as well as overall trust, is plummeting. The crimes that you are infamous for are creating militias you were initially trying to smother, which naturally, and for what it's worth, constitutionally poses a threat to your power. So yet again, you need a solution. So let me give you 3 options on how to possibly solve the problem you are faced with. You could A. set up programs giving back to your citizens, such as police and citizen community activities, building trust with law enforcement, and building a "we serve the people" mantra. You could B. literally do nothing and hope this newly adopted perception of you goes away, along with streaks of good behavior displayed. Or C. you could revert to your previous solutions and murder more people. So, those are your 3 options. Now hopefully you as a listener chose either A or B, assuming that you are a decent human being whose last resort is the harming of others. And it's at this point you can stop imagining that you are the government, because unsurprisingly, Big Brother chose option C. And so far, their approach this time has worked. So at this point, the government's goal is to extinguish the resistance posed by their own citizens. And surely, if they were to ruffle more feathers and started killing off militias one by one, it would probably ignite a revolution. So instead of killing their enemies outright, this time the government themselves needed to be the victims of terror. But how did they do it? Well, it involves a special somebody named Timothy McVeigh. Yes, that Timothy McVeigh. The same McVeigh that was discharged from the military in 1992 and even made an appearance at Waco. He was so furious with the government that he tried to join anti-government militias and was kicked out of most of them for being too radical. So, the mastermind waited 2 years, and on the anniversary of Waco, he, alone, definitely with no one else, besides a crime scene absent accomplice named Terry Nichols, drove a truck full of fertilizer into Oklahoma City and blew up a government building, killing 168 people. That was the story we, the public, were told, and we believed. And the government successfully stopped fast-forming militias. But what we weren't told was that McVeigh was never discharged from the military, that he wrote to his family members that he was selected to serve in the special forces, working on domestic operations such as flying drugs into the United States, and even being filmed by a military filmmaker in 1993, which was confirmed by an audiologist to be an exact match to McVeigh. We also weren't told that at the scene of the crime, according to several eyewitnesses, that McVeigh was accompanied by someone else, someone with a medium build and a tattoo on his arm. But in the FBI's official report, they stuck with McVeigh going solo. And as for McVeigh's accomplice, Terry Nichols, who admitted that McVeigh mentioned the name Larry Potts, who was the lead FBI agent, in an angry tone when he was briefed that the location of the bombing was changed from one location to the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. Or how about McVeigh's death row cellmate, David Paul Hammer's account, where in the time that Hammer spent on death row, he wrote 2 books on his conversations with McVeigh, explaining that McVeigh frequently talked about how he was working for the Major and how he was sheep-dipped. And for those who don't know what being sheep-dipped is, it is a military maneuver that involves taking a serviceman and falsifying their discharge documents, and then behind the scenes, they continue to serve. This was practiced in the Vietnam War. And for the highly questionable execution of McVeigh, Hammer wrote that McVeigh claimed he wouldn't even be executed, and would be given drugs to give the appearance of death, but would later continue to serve in the Special Forces. This claim seems far-fetched, but when you take into the account that the federal government requested that there was to be no autopsy performed after McVeigh's execution, when autopsies are an absolute standard protocol after federal executions. Also, in addition, that Susan Carlson, a main reporter at the execution, stated that after McVeigh was pronounced dead, he could be seen breathing and his eyes were blinking. So if you compare the government's narrative on the Oklahoma City bombing and its origins to the accounts of McVeigh, his accomplice, McVeigh's death row cellmate, the several eyewitnesses claiming to see McVeigh driving with someone else before the bombing, and Susan Carlson, who again stated that McVeigh was seen breathing and blinking after his death, these 2 stories are not only conflicting, but are revealing. That the information that seems as if it would be crucial to an investigation is completely ignored and absent from the FBI's official report. And for the record, the contents of McVeigh's conversations with his family members and his death row cellmate were never mentioned by his defense team. Just something to think about. So in the end, we have a government infamous for murdering its own citizens, lecturing their people on how horrific and evil the Oklahoma City bombing was, releasing a report completely absent of all the information given from eyewitnesses, family members, McVeigh's acquaintances, and McVeigh himself. Almost as if everything we've been told about the Oklahoma City bombing and its origins was a complete lie. And if there is one constant, one absolute, it would be that the government has not told the truth about the incident, even down to the explosion itself. See, there wasn't a single mention in the FBI's official report of the planting of explosives along with the fertilizer truck, because it doesn't take a scientist to see a truck full of fertilizer is not enough to collapse the entire face of a building that size. Or does it? Because according to Samuel T. Cohen, the creator of the neutron bomb, he said, "I believe that the demolition charges in the building that were placed inside a key concrete columns did the primary damage. It would have been absolutely impossible and against the laws of nature for a truck full of fertilizer and oil, no matter its size, to do that much damage." So the story that we were told was that an anti-government psycho blew up a government building in response to Waco on Waco's anniversary, to perfectly shift the face of evil from the government itself to those who resist it. But Timothy McVeigh did murder 168 people, but not with the intentions of getting back at the government, but by following orders. Orders given by, you guessed it, the government. And every time this is brought up into the press and received by government agencies, it is swiftly met with a denial of said allegations. Because the government would never lie. How dare you think that the government would ever murder its own citizens? That's crazy talk. Of course, they have the people's best interest in mind. Again, in all seriousness, the government has no limitations, and we must remind ourselves of this fact. If it's being peddled by the government, it's more than likely catalysts for enslavement rather than freedom, and there are no amount of lies enough to be spilt to tighten their grip on power. This is the Freedom Frontier, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.